a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, was the younger daughter of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth and the only sibling of Queen Elizabeth II. Margaret spent much of her childhood with her parents and sister. Her life changed dramatically in 1936, when her paternal uncle, King Edward VIII, abdicated to marry a divorcée, Wallis Simpson. Margaret's father became king, and her sister became heir presumptive, with Margaret second in line to the throne. During the Second World War, the two sisters stayed at Windsor Castle, despite suggestions to evacuate them to Canada. During the war years, Margaret was considered too young to perform any official duties and instead continued her education. After the war, Margaret fell in love with Group Captain Peter Townsend. In 1952, Margaret's father died. Her sister became queen, and Townsend divorced his first wife. Early the following year, he proposed to Margaret. Many in the government believed he would be an unsuitable husband for the Queen's 22-year-old sister, and the Church of England refused to countenance marriage to a divorced man. Margaret eventually abandoned her plans with him, and in 1960, she accepted the proposal of the photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones, who was created Earl of Snowdon by the Queen. The couple had two children, David and Sarah. Margaret was often viewed as a controversial member of the British royal family. Her divorce in 1978 earned her negative publicity, and she was romantically associated with several men. Her health gradually deteriorated in the final 2 decades of her life. A heavy smoker for most of her adult life, Margaret had a lung operation in 1985, a bout of pneumonia in 1993, and at least 3 strokes between 1998 and 2001. She died at King Edward VII's Hospital on the 9th of February 2002. Early life. Margaret was born on the 21st of August 1930 at Wallis Castle in Scotland, her mother's ancestral home, and was affectionately known as Margot within the royal family. She was delivered by Sir Henry Simpson, the royal obstetrician. The Home Secretary, J.R. Clines, was present to verify the birth. The registration of her birth was delayed for several days to avoid her being numbered 13 in the parish register. At the time of her birth, she was 4th in the line of succession to the British throne. Her father was the Duke of York, the second son of King George V and Queen Mary. Her mother was the Duchess of York, the youngest daughter of the 14th Earl, and the Countess of Strathmore and Kinghorn. The Duchess of York originally wanted to name her second daughter Anne Margaret, as she explained to Queen Mary in a letter, "I am very anxious to call her Anne Margaret, as I think Anne of York sounds pretty, and Elizabeth and Anne go so well together." King George V disliked the name Anne, but approved of the alternative, Margaret Rose. Margaret was baptised in the private chapel of Buckingham Palace on the 30th of October 1930 by Cosmo Lang, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Margaret's early life was spent primarily at the Yorks' residences at 145 Piccadilly and Royal Lodge in Windsor. The Yorks were perceived by the public as an ideal family, father, mother and children, but unfounded rumours that Margaret was deaf and mute were not completely dispelled until Margaret's first main public appearance at her uncle Prince George's wedding in 1934. She was educated alongside her sister, Princess Elizabeth, by their Scottish governess Marian Crawford. Margaret's education was mainly supervised by her mother, who, in the words of Randolph Churchill, never aimed at bringing her daughters up to be more than nicely behaved young ladies. When Queen Mary insisted upon the importance of education, the Duchess of York commented, "I don't know what she meant. After all, I and my sisters only had governesses and we all married well, one of us very well." Margaret was resentful about her limited education, especially in later years, and aimed criticism at her mother. However, Margaret's mother told a friend that she regretted that her daughters did not go to school like other children, and the employment of a governess rather than sending the girls to school may have been done only at the insistence of King George V. Margaret's grandfather, George V, died when she was 5, and her uncle succeeded as King Edward VIII. Less than a year later, on the 11th of December 1936, Edward abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American, whom neither the Church of England nor the Dominion governments would accept as queen. The Church would not recognise the marriage of a divorced woman with a living ex-husband as valid. Edward's abdication left a reluctant Duke of York in his place as King George VI, and Margaret unexpectedly became second in line to the throne, with the title the Princess Margaret to indicate her status as a child of the sovereign. The family moved into Buckingham Palace. Margaret's room overlooked them all. Margaret was a brownie in the first Buckingham Palace Brownie Pack, formed in 1937. She was also a Girl Guide and later a Sea Ranger. She served as president of Girl Guiding UK from 1965 until her death in 2002. At the outbreak of World War II, Margaret and her sister were at Birk Hall, on the Balmoral Castle estate, where they stayed until Christmas 1939, enduring nights so cold that drinking water in carafes by their bedside froze. They spent Christmas at Sandringham House before moving to Windsor Castle, just outside London, for much of the remainder of the war. Viscount Hailsham wrote to Prime Minister Winston Churchill to advise the evacuation of the princesses to the greater safety of Canada, to which their mother famously replied, "The children won't go without me, I won't leave without the king, and the king will never leave." Unlike other members of the royal family, Margaret was not expected to undertake any public or official duties during the war. She developed her skills at singing and playing the piano. Her contemporaries thought she was spoiled by her parents, especially her father, who allowed her to take liberties not usually permissible, such as being allowed to stay up to dinner at the age of 13. Crawford despaired at the attention Margaret was getting, writing to friends, "Could you this year only ask Princess Elizabeth to your party? Princess Margaret does draw all the attention and Princess Elizabeth lets her do that." Elizabeth, however, did not mind this, and commented, "Oh, it's so much easier when Margaret's there, everybody laughs at what Margaret says." King George described Elizabeth as his pride and Margaret as his joy. Post-war years. At the end of the war in 1945, Margaret appeared on the balcony at Buckingham Palace with her family and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Afterwards, both Elizabeth and Margaret joined the crowds outside the palace, incognito, chanting, "We want the King, we want the Queen." On the 15th of April 1946, Margaret was confirmed into the Church of England. On the 1st of February 1947, she, Elizabeth, and their parents embarked on a state tour of southern Africa. The 3-month-long visit was Margaret's first visit abroad, and she later claimed that she remembered every minute of it. Margaret was chaperoned by Peter Townsend, the King's equerry. Later that year, Margaret was a bridesmaid at Elizabeth's wedding. In the next 3 years Elizabeth had 2 children, Charles and Anne, whose births moved Margaret further down the line of succession. In 1950, the former royal governess, Marion Crawford, published an unauthorized biography of Elizabeth's and Margaret's childhood years, titled The Little Princesses, in which she described Margaret's light-hearted fun and frolics, and her amusing and outrageous antics, as a beautiful young woman, with an 18-inch waist and vivid blue eyes. Margaret enjoyed socializing with high society and the young, aristocratic set, including Sharman Douglas, the daughter of the American ambassador, Lewis Williams Douglas, a celebrated beauty known for her glamour and fashion sense. Margaret was often featured in the press at balls, parties, and nightclubs. The number of her official engagements increased, and she joined a growing number of charitable organizations as president or patron. Her 21st birthday party was held at Balmoral in August 1951. The following month her father underwent surgery for lung cancer, and Margaret was appointed one of the councillors of state who undertook the king's official duties while he was incapacitated. Her father died 5 months later, in February 1952, and her sister became queen. Romance with Peter Townsend. Margaret was grief-stricken by her father's death and was prescribed sedatives to help her sleep. Of her father she wrote, "He was such a wonderful person, the very heart and centre of our happy family." She was consoled by her deeply held Christian beliefs. With her widowed mother, Margaret moved out of Buckingham Palace and into Clarence House, while her sister and her family moved out of Clarence House and into Buckingham Palace. Peter Townsend was appointed controller of her mother's restructured household. By 1953, he was divorced from his first wife and proposed marriage to Margaret. He was 16 years her senior and had 2 children from his previous marriage. Margaret accepted and informed her sister, the Queen, of her desire to marry Townsend. The Queen's consent was required by the Royal Marriages Act 1772, as in 1936. The Church of England refused to countenance the remarriage of the divorced. Queen Mary had recently died, and Elizabeth was about to be crowned. After her coronation, she planned to tour the Commonwealth for 6 months. The Queen told Margaret, "Under the circumstances, it isn't unreasonable for me to ask you to wait a year." The Queen was counselled by her private secretary, Sir Alan Lascelles, to post Townsend abroad, but she refused, and instead transferred him from the Queen Mother's household to her own. The British cabinet refused to approve the marriage, and newspapers reported that the marriage was unthinkable and would fly in the face of royal and Christian tradition. Churchill informed the Queen that the Dominion Prime Ministers were unanimously against the marriage, and that Parliament would not approve a marriage that would be unrecognised by the Church of England unless Margaret renounced her rights to the throne. Churchill arranged for Townsend to be posted to Brussels. Polls run by popular newspapers appeared to show that the public supported Margaret's personal choice, regardless of church teaching or the government's opinion. For 2 years, press speculation continued. Margaret was told by clerics that she would be unable to receive communion if she married a divorced man. Papers released in 2004 to the National Archives show that the Queen and the new Prime Minister Sir Anthony Eden drew up a plan in 1955 under which Princess Margaret would have been able to marry Townsend by removing Margaret and any children from the marriage out of the line of succession. Margaret would be allowed to keep her royal title and her civil list allowance, stay in the country and even continue with her public duties. Eden summed up the Queen's attitude in a letter on the subject to the Commonwealth Prime Ministers. Her Majesty would not wish to stand in the way of her sister's happiness. Eden himself was very sympathetic. Exclusion from the succession would not entail any other change in Princess Margaret's position as a member of the royal family, he wrote. The final draft of this proposal was produced on the 28th of October 1955. On the 31st of October, Margaret issued a statement. Other rumoured suitors included the Honourable Dominic Elliot, Billy Wallis, Colin Tennant, and future Canadian Prime Minister John Turner. Marriage. Princess Margaret first met the photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones at a supper party in 1958. She married Armstrong-Jones at Westminster Abbey on 6 May 1960. She reportedly accepted his proposal a day after learning from Peter Townsend that he intended to marry a young Belgian woman, Marie-Luce de Magne, who was half his age and bore a striking resemblance to Princess Margaret. Margaret's announcement of her engagement, on 26 February 1960, took the press by surprise. She had taken care to conceal the romance from reporters. They had become engaged in October 1959. Armstrong-Jones proposed to Margaret with a ruby engagement ring surrounded by diamonds in the shape of a rosebud. The ceremony was the first royal wedding to be broadcast on television, and it attracted viewing figures of 300 million worldwide. 2,000 guests were invited for the wedding ceremony. Queen Ingrid of Denmark and the King and Queen of Sweden were among the foreign royalty to attend the wedding. Margaret's wedding dress was designed by Norman Hartnell and worn with the Poltimore tiara. She had 8 young bridesmaids, led by her niece, Princess Anne. The other bridesmaids were her goddaughter, Marilyn Wills, daughter of her cousin Jean Elphinstone and Major John Lysett Wills; Annabel Rhodes, daughter of her cousin Margaret Elphinstone and Denise Rhodes; Lady Virginia Fitzroy, daughter of Hugh Fitzroy, Earl of Euston; Sarah Lowther, daughter of Sir John Lowther; Catherine Vesey, daughter of Viscount de Vesey; Lady Rose Neville, daughter of the Marquess of Abergavenny; and Lady Angela Neville, daughter of Lord Rupert Neville. She made her way with the Duke of Edinburgh from Clarence House in the glass coach, arriving at the church at 11:30. The Duke escorted the bride, and the best man was Dr. Roger Gilliatt. The Archbishop of Canterbury Geoffrey Fisher conducted the marriage service. Following the ceremony, The couple made the traditional appearance on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. The honeymoon was a 6-week Caribbean cruise aboard the royal yacht Britannia. As a wedding present, Colin Tennant gave her a plot of land on his private Caribbean island, Mustique. The newlyweds moved into rooms in Kensington Palace. In 1961, Margaret's husband was created Earl of Snowdon. The couple had 2 children, David, Viscount Linley, born the 3rd of November 1961, and Lady Sarah, born the 1st of May 1964. The marriage widened Margaret's social circle beyond the court and aristocracy to include show business celebrities and bohemians. At the time, it was thought to reflect the breaking down of British class barriers. The Snowdons experimented with the styles and fashions of the 1960s. Public life and charity work. Among Margaret's first official engagements was launching the ocean liner Edinburgh Castle in Belfast in 1947. Subsequently, Margaret went on multiple tours of various places. In her first major tour she joined her parents and sister for a tour of South Africa in 1947. Her tour aboard Britannia to the British colonies in the Caribbean in 1955 created a sensation throughout the West Indies, and calypsos were dedicated to her. As colonies of the British Commonwealth of Nations sought nationhood, Princess Margaret represented the Crown at independence ceremonies in Jamaica in 1962 and Tuvalu and Dominica in 1978. Her visit to Tuvalu was cut short by an illness, which may have been viral pneumonia, and she was flown to Australia to recuperate. Other overseas tours included the United States in 1963, Japan in 1969 and 1979, the United States and Canada in 1974, Australia in 1975, the Philippines in 1980, Swaziland in 1981, and China in 1987. During an official visit to Copenhagen, Denmark, in 1964, she was allegedly bugged by the KGB. Her main interests were welfare charities, music and ballet. She was president of the National Society and of the Royal Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children and Invalid Children's Aid nationwide. She was Grand President of the St. John Ambulance Brigade and Colonel-in-Chief of Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps. She was also the president or patron of numerous organizations, such as the West Indies Olympic Association, the Girl Guides, Northern Ballet Theatre, Birmingham Royal Ballet, Scottish Ballet, Children First, Tenovus Cancer Care, the Royal College of Nursing, and the London Lighthouse. At some points Margaret was criticised for not being as active as other members of the royal family. Private life. Reportedly, Margaret had her first extramarital affair in 1966, with her daughter's godfather Anthony Barton, a Bordeaux wine producer. A year later she had a 1-month liaison with Robin Douglas Home, a nephew of former British Prime Minister Alec Douglas Home. Margaret claimed that her relationship with Douglas Home was platonic, but her letters to him were intimate. Douglas Home, who suffered from depression, committed suicide 18 months after the split with Margaret, claims that she was romantically involved with musician Mick Jagger, actor Peter Sellers, and Australian cricketer Keith Miller are unproven. According to biographer Charlotte Breese, entertainer Leslie Hutchinson had a brief liaison with Margaret in 1955. A 2009 biography of actor David Niven included assertions, based on information from Niven's widow and a good friend of Niven's, that he had had an affair with the princess, who was 20 years his junior. In 1975, the princess was listed among women with whom actor Warren Beatty had had romantic relationships. John Bindon, a Cockney actor who had spent time in prison, sold his story to the Daily Mirror, boasting of a close relationship with Margaret. By the early 1970s, the Snowdons had drifted apart. In September 1973, Colin Tennant introduced Margaret to Roddy Llewellyn. Llewellyn was 17 years her junior. In 1974, she invited him as a guest to the holiday home she had built on Mustique. It was the first of several visits. Margaret described their relationship as a loving friendship. Once, when Llewellyn left on an impulsive trip to Turkey, Margaret became emotionally distraught and took an overdose of sleeping tablets. "I was so exhausted, because of everything," She later said that all I wanted to do was sleep. As she recovered, her ladies-in-waiting kept Lord Snowdon away from her, afraid that seeing him would distress her further. In February 1976, a picture of Margaret and Llewellyn in swimsuits on Mystique was published on the front page of the News of the World tabloid. The press portrayed Margaret as a predatory older woman, and Llewellyn as her toy boy lover. On the 19th of March 1976, the Snowdons publicly acknowledged that their marriage had irretrievably broken down. Some politicians suggested removing Margaret from the civil list. Labour MPs denounced her as a royal parasite and a floozy. In May 1978, she was taken ill and diagnosed as suffering from gastroenteritis and alcoholic hepatitis. On the 11th of July 1978, the Snowdons' divorce was finalised. It was the first divorce of a senior member of the British royal family since Princess Victoria Melita of Edinburgh's in 1901. In December 1978, Snowdon married Lucy Lindsay Hogg. In August 1979, Louis Mountbatten, 1st Earl Mountbatten of Burma, and members of his family were killed by a bomb planted by the Provisional Irish Republican Army. That October, while on a fundraising tour of the United States on behalf of the Royal Opera House, Margaret was seated at a dinner reception in Chicago with columnist Abra Henderson and Mayor Jane Byrne. Margaret told them that the royal family had been moved by the many letters of condolence from Ireland. The following day, Anderson's rival Irv Kupcinet published a claim that Margaret had referred to the Irish as pigs. Margaret, Anderson and Byrne all issued immediate denials, but the damage was already done. The rest of the tour drew demonstrations, and Margaret's security was doubled in the face of physical threats. In 1981, Llewellyn married Tatiana Soskin, whom he had known for 10 years. Margaret remained close friends with them both. In January 1981, Margaret was a guest on the BBC Radio 4 programme Desert Island Discs. The appearance is described by The Guardian. She is fantastically posh, chooses Rule Britannia as one of her discs, and asks for Scotland the Brave played by the pipes and drums of my regiment, the Royal Highland Fusiliers. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to